Obviously, the greatest game in this country is the good old hockey game, and we all know the cat that runs the game is the commissioner, Gary Bettman. Now, Gary Bettman has his fans, and Gary Bettman has those people who aren't his fans. But how does the most controversial man in the game get to this position? Well, here you go. Gary grew up in Queens, New York, actually studied labor relations at Cornell University. He also studied law at NYU, then got a big job at a New York law firm. 1981, Gary Bettman joins the National Basketball Association and rose to third in command under Commissioner David Stern. Now, you may recall that during the 80s, well, the NBA exploded in popularity. So basically, if you're a senior executive in the NBA, you were a hot commodity. And in the early 90s, the National Hockey League, well, they were trying to grow up and be bigger in America. So boom, they go grab Bettman and say, your mandate, grow the game. So how's Gary done? Well, one thing we know for sure is that the league has exploded with the number of teams. Gary has added 6 new teams in America, most of them in the southern United States. We also lost Quebec. They went to Colorado. And of course, you Jets fans know that Winnipeg moved to Phoenix as well. But the thing that the league cares about more than anything is money. And so, how'd that play? Well, the league's revenue when Bettman took over was $400 million a year. Now, it's more than $2 billion. So there have been some good stuff. There's been some down stuff. A couple of those new franchises, actually way more than a couple, especially Nashville and Phoenix, though, they are struggling. Oh, and don't forget, there was a couple of lockouts, including one that shut down the entire 04-05 season.
I have no choice but to announce the formal cancellation of play for 2004-2005.
But when you're the commissioner of the league, you got to deal with the way the rules work. You got to deal with the public image of the game, the Bertuzzi-Moore incident, dealing with Sean Avery's comments, and of late, what to do with fighting in the game. Everybody, please welcome the commish, Gary Bettman. How are you? Nice to see you, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
I brought you a present.
You brought me a present?
I brought you a present.
Are you going to give me the Nashville Predators?
No.
Okay.
It has to fit in this bag.
Okay.
I know you're a big Canadiens fan.
I'm a huge Canadiens fan, yeah.
This is an All-Star jersey from the past weekend. Eastern team, signed by all the All-Stars.
Oh, amazing. Well done. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I figured if I sucked up to you to start, this would go easy.
This would go easy for you. Yeah, I wonder if your interviews in America are different than your interviews in Canada, because every time you do an interview with Canadian press, it always looks like the war starts, question 1.
Not from everybody, but there are some in your profession who think their idea of a good time is to see how we can duke it out. And, you know, I won't shy away from a good fight. Right. I don't look for them. But you got to do what you got to do.
Well, I'm sure we'll go down a lot of different roads in this one. But I was always really curious about the first time you saw a hockey game. When did you first look at a hockey game and say that's, you know, your early memories of the sport?
I remember going to a hockey game in the old Madison Square Garden as a youngster, seeing the Rangers play. Very vague memory. My focus on hockey, because I grew up in New York, and so you had your choice of football, basketball, baseball, and hockey, and multiple teams in some of the sports at various times. But as an undergrad at Cornell University, slightly after the Dryden era, right after the undefeated season for the NCAA championship, I was a season ticket holder for 4 years at Liner Rink, 4,000 people, great atmosphere, and you had to sleep out for a couple of days on ticket line just to get your season tickets.
And you would have been around too, as a young adult, when the Islanders were on that incredible run.
Well, that's actually when I got back from Cornell in '74. The Islanders had just started up, and they were beginning to develop. I also tended to gravitate towards the expansion teams.
Nobody's going to be surprised to hear you say that, by the way.
Well, no. For a reason that would surprise you.
Really?
I'm a little older than you are, and when I was in elementary school in the 50s, I was maybe the only child in my school who was growing up in a single-parent household at the time. And so since I predominantly spent my youth that way, instead of having somebody pass down the traditions, the rooting interests as you did from either your father or grandfather in a particular team, I had to get my instant history. So it was easier as a practical matter. Some psychologist would figure out why I did what I did, but as a practical matter, it gave me an instant ramp up so that nobody would know more about the history of the team than I did.
That's a really interesting way to look at Gary Bettman.
Well, you know, and I only figured that out a few years ago.
Expansion is not out of the question down the road for this league, right?
I think that's right.
So do you want to, is it a priority for you to have another team in Canada?
The answer to that is I don't know, because we don't have a list, we haven't studied. So when you're going to expand or relocate with a new owner, you got to look at three things. You got to look at the market, you got to look at the arena, and you got to look at the owner. All three of those things are vitally important to any franchise. At any point in time when we're either going to relocate, if we have to do that, no plans to do that, or we expand, we'll go through a process and see where the best combination is. I expect that there are places in Canada that would make sense, but it's not anything we studied. Yes, everybody says, well, of course, Southern Ontario. By the way, Southern Ontario may be great at some point, but by the way, you're going to need a new arena. You're going to need a team. You're talking about, I don't know, an $800, $900 million investment, getting close to $1 billion. You know, that's not a cavalier decision that you make on the basis of a hunch.
Well, you helped get the rule in that essentially kept the Flames and the Oilers in Canada. Yeah. That was an important thing to the league.
Well, that's why I laugh, as do the owners of the Canadian clubs, about somehow we're anti-Canadian. You know, if you ask Calgary and Edmonton, they'd tell you they wouldn't be around today if it wasn't for what we did with the Canadian Assistance Plan when they needed the help. We try and make it work, and that's our priority. If you have a situation that is unsalvageable, and I don't think we have any of those, but if you had one of those, then you deal with it. And if we decide we have to relocate, or if, in fact, we decide under circumstances far different than we're seeing today, particularly with the economy, we're interested in expanding, then we're going to look at every opportunity.
All right, we'll stay on that one. We're going to have more of a conversation with Gary Bettman, and an opportunity could include Jim Balsillie. We'll find out what Gary really thinks about Jim Balsillie and his bid to join the NHL when we come back. The Jim Balsillie thing. Insiders view Balsillie as a bit of a cowboy, and the one thing that Bettman and the owners don't like is that guy, so that there is a personality clash that is hard to get past. All right, you're back on the hour. Holy smokes, Monday on the program. The handsome, feisty Gordon Ramsay, the great chef, will be back on the show. But not just that, the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard. But that is then. Right now, let's come back to our conversation with your boyfriend, NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman. You look at the teams in the markets they're in now. Again, business planning. Do you anticipate they'll all be there in 3 years?
That's my expectation.
I hear the Hartford Whalers are selling a lot of merchandise at the NHL store in New York.
Actually, Pete Carmanos was very surprised. He's the owner of the Carolina
Hurricanes. I heard the word was pissed off.
Who told you that?
No, I was there. I was in New York. I went to New York because I went to the NHL store. As he should be, right? Why not? Because Hartford was...
Well, no, actually, when he didn't really understand why we were selling the merchandise, and we explained to him that we have a heritage program. Yeah. And so it wasn't just the Hartford Whalers. And one of the great things about this game is the history and tradition, and people like to buy that stuff. I actually, believe that it is the game that fosters that connection, and what I think sets us apart from the other sports, more than the fact that we operate in two countries and there are some differences, but I think it's the fact that our fans tend to be more connected to our game more than the fans of any other sport.
Well, and you saw that as evidence in the All-Star game over the weekend in Montreal. It was so funny to watch the All-Star game there because obviously very hockey-savvy fans, and when Zdeno Chara or Tim Thomas got near the puck, two Boston Bruins, even in the All-Star, they booed the hell out of them.
Although by the end it turned.
Yeah, well,
it's to respect.
Yeah, totally. As soon as Zdeno Chara won that set the record, they respected him. The only other guy that got booed that day was you when you walked on the ice.
Not as bad as in some other places. It's funny. Maybe it's why I sometimes like expansion teams. I got a standing ovation in Nashville once. But actually, the way I view that is, and I don't want to tell people the secret. Yeah. If I walk into a board meeting and I get booed like that, then I better think about what I'm doing. But frankly, if I walk out there and it's silent, then I think I need to reevaluate what I'm doing.
Yeah, and exactly, and I respect that.
And the booing is the passion. By the way, like politicians, commissioners get booed, and it's okay.
But I know that on a personal level, that must burn you a little bit.
The only time it bothered me at all was when my kids were younger, because and now my youngest is 20, and I have grandchildren. But the fact is, when they were younger and they saw me get booed, I know it bothered them because they didn't understand it. Now they laugh like I do.
The Jim Balsillie thing. There's a lot made of that in this country about how Jim has been on this show, and he didn't want to give too much, obviously, because I think he wants a team. But there's clearly an indication, and for me, and I've talked to a million people that I can just doing research in the NHL, that says that the NHL, for lack of a better term, insiders view Balsillie as a bit of a cowboy, and the one thing that Bettman and the owners don't like is that guy, and so that there's a personality clash that is hard to get past.
First of all, there's no personality clash because I don't get a vote. To the extent that there's an issue, we've had, you see, Jim, and I've met with him a number of times, I happen to like him, but Jim has had interaction indirectly or directly with a number of clubs, and some of the teams haven't enjoyed that interaction. There were 2 deals he backed out of, even though he protests to the contrary.
Yeah, I think that there's some changes with the contract that kept being introduced.
No, believe me, he understood the rules going in, and he did it. He started selling tickets in a place where he had no right to do that.
Right. That was his PR move, though, and you knew that.
You know what? That's not the answer. The answer is, when you come into a league, you're supposed to conduct yourself in a certain way. It's not about being a cowboy. It's about who's your partner going to be. And there have been a number of instances where teams have had interactions where they've been less than ideal in terms of the circumstances, and some of the owners are not comfortable with the way the league or those clubs have been treated. There have been, allegations from Jim's camp that the league is either anti-Canadian or the like. Attacking me or attacking the league isn't really the best way to get in.
David Stern, who has run the NBA through periods of great success and, it's plateaued and all that stuff over the years, he was asked not that long ago what his biggest mistake in his heart was, and he said he regretted moving Vancouver, that he thought we shouldn't have moved Vancouver so quickly. And
See, commissioners don't like to move franchises.
That's right. No, of course. Why would anybody, right? Because you build fan bases. But I wondered for you, if you looked at your tenure, and I don't mean a franchise specifically, this is just in general, did you look at your run, and because you've had lots of successes, and you've had things that haven't worked for you, have you thought, man, I made the wrong call on that one? Do you have one of those moments, the one you wish you could get back?
I'm not a big fan of looking back and saying, ooh, that was really good, or boo, that was really bad. If I have one regret, as strong as the league is now and as well as we're doing, the run-up years to the work stoppage and the work stoppage itself, I wish I could have been more persuasive to the union, not just in terms of the problems because they didn't want to hear it, but making clear that this was going to be the improvement and the embodiment of a stronger, healthier, more entertaining game. And because we went through 2-3 years leading up to the work stoppage where we were struggling, then we had the year off. Now, we had to do that, and the end results are quite strong with the game being better than it's been, 4 years of record revenues and record attendance. I wish we could have had what we got coming out of the work stoppage back in 2001, because we would have been 3-4 years ahead of where we are now, particularly on things like media.
A lot of people, the suspension of Sean Avery, you got a lot of support for that. A lot of people came out and said that the league did the right thing on that. I wondered what that conversation was like between you and Avery.
Well, it wasn't the first conversation we had had. It was, that wasn't intended to be a joke. It was, it happened to be the truth. I think Sean was at the point where he recognized that he needed some counseling and he wanted it, and I was more concerned with first making a statement about our players and our game in general, that this isn't typical of what we are, and two, I thought it was important that Sean be able to step away and get the help and counseling he wanted, and that's what he's doing. And I think, the good news is I think he's turning a page and moving forward, and on any sort of personal level, that's the most important thing. The Stars have moved on. They're actually playing better. So clearly that was not a good marriage.
What do you do about fighting? Because fights are up now, but I mean, fights go up and down all the time. It's just that now it's just part of the conversation. What do the owners want to do about fighting?
Well, two things. One, it's up compared to last year and the year before. It's about where it was before the work stoppage, and it's below the era of the 80s. When the skilled Edmonton teams that everybody points to in terms of the glory days, fighting was much more involved in the game.
All Dave Semenko and Chris Nyland.
Well,
that was just two guys.
But you know what? Fighting has always had a part of the game. I think the conversation now, obviously, is reached more prominence because of the terrible Don Sanderson tragedy. Although Don was playing in a league that had no fighting rule, and so what we need to do first and foremost, and we'll do this first with the general managers and then with the competition committees, we have to have an important discussion about the role of fighting. I think I know how that comes out, but I think we still have to have that discussion and understand the nuances. And then I think we need to be looking at what, if anything, we can do to make fighting safer, because the safety of the players is paramount. Do you have a helmet rule where once the helmet comes off, the fight's over? No takedowns, you know,
Those are both great rules, because then fighters have to fight.
By the way, that's what we have, and I've had a conversation with a couple of our fighters about what they think, you know, would make sense to do that. And so we're going to get a lot of input. We're going to have a very careful, deliberate discussion, and, you know, we'll decide what changes, if any, would be appropriate.
Thanks for coming on. A real pleasure.
Great to be here with you. Thank you.
Gary Bettman, everybody. Still to come tonight, Muse. Jason Muse.
All right, from New York City's Gary Bettman to New Jersey's Jason Muse. You know, from Jay and Silent Bob fame, Muse has been to hell and back, and he'll tell us the story when we return.
For 2005.
But when you're the commissioner of the league, you got to deal with the way the rules work. You got to deal with the public image of the game, the Bertuzzi-Moore incident, dealing with Sean Avery's comments, and of late, what to do with fighting in the game.
Everybody, please welcome the commish, Gary Bettman. Lovely. How are you? Good to be here. Nice to see you, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
I brought you a present.
You brought me a present?
I brought you a present.
Are you going to give me the Nashville Predators?
No.
Okay.
It has to fit in this bag.
Okay.
I know you're a big Canadiens fan.
I'm a huge Canadiens fan, yeah.
This is an All-Star jersey from the past weekend. Eastern team, signed by all the All-Stars. Oh.
All right, obviously the greatest game in this country is the good old hockey game, and we all know the cat that runs the game is the commissioner, Gary Bettman. Now, Gary Bettman has his fans, and Gary Bettman has those people who aren't his fans. But how does the most controversial man in the game get to this position? Well, here you go. Gary grew up in Queens, New York, actually studied labor relations at Cornell University. He also studied law at NYU, then got a big job at a New York law firm. 1981, Gary Bettman joins the National Basketball Association and rose to third in command under Commissioner David Stern. Now, you may recall that during the 80s, well, the NBA exploded in popularity. So basically, if you're a senior executive in the NBA, you were a hot commodity. And in the early 90s, the National Hockey League, well, they were trying to grow up and be bigger in America. So boom, they go grab Bettman and say, your mandate, grow the game. So how's Gary done? Well, one thing we know for sure is that the league has exploded with the number of teams. Gary has added 6 new teams in America, most of them in the southern United States. We also lost Quebec. They went to Colorado. And of course, you Jets fans know that Winnipeg moved to Phoenix as well. But the thing that the league cares about more than anything is money. And so, how'd that play? Well, the league's revenue when Bettman took over was $400 million a year. Now, it's more than $2 billion. So there have been some good stuff. There's been some down stuff. A couple of those new franchises, actually way more than a couple, especially Nashville and Phoenix, though, they are struggling. Oh, and don't forget, there was a couple of lockouts, including one that shut down the entire 04-05 season.
I have no choice but to announce the formal cancellation of play for 2000.
Oh, amazing. Well done. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I figured if I sucked up to you to start, this would go easy.
This would go easy for you. Yeah, I wonder if your interviews in America are different than your interviews in Canada, because every time you do an interview with Canadian press, it always looks like the war starts, question 1.
Not from everybody, but there are some in your profession who think their idea of a good time is to see how we can duke it out. And, you know, I won't shy away from a good fight. Right. I don't look for them. But you got to do what you got to do.
Well, I'm sure we'll go down a lot of different roads in this one. But I was always really curious about the first time you saw a hockey game.